Hey guys, welcome to another episode of On Air. I'm excited about this one. I've got Emmanuel now. I'm going to try it. Frauenlob. Is that any good?
That's very good.
Brilliant, fantastic. Who's joining me today? Now, Emmanuel is the co-founder and CEO of Mesg.ai. He'll tell us a bit more about that in a moment. I've met Emmanuel recently. Was really impressed by his knowledge and his expertise and his experience in and around the topic that we're going to be talking about today. And the best part of it is he's right in it, right at the moment as he launches Mesg.ai and takes it to market in the early stage. And today we're going to be exploring what sales looks like at that early stage of a startup, all of the challenges that come with being in that early stage, and also the opportunities and things that you'll need to navigate. So what better person to have joining us than Emmanuel? Firstly, Emmanuel, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, hi Owen. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I mean, it's super exciting times. Starting a startup in the lockdown. Basically, that's what we did. And yeah, I'm following your podcast for some time now. And yeah, great work you're doing. I'm really excited to be on the show.
Thank you very much. And as always, I'll give you the routine 2 minutes because you are a startup and maybe some of our audience haven't heard of Mesg.ai before and they want to know a bit more. So give me 2 minutes. Who's Emmanuel? What's your background and what's Mesg.ai?
Yeah, so I'm Austrian. So as you probably have noticed by my last name, I'm not English. So I'm based here in Salzburg. I founded with two co-founders a startup in London. We came out of Antler, which is a startup generator. I'm in B2B selling since 25 years. I worked for large blue chips like Amazon Web Services, like IBM, and I work for startups as well and scale-ups. The last one is a company called Trackman. And if you are a golf fan or a baseball fan, you might notice the ball flight lines, the trajectories on television. That is coming from Trackman. I built the sales team there for Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and also Asia. And so what is Mesg.ai? At Mesg.ai, we help sales teams to book more sales meetings. And we do that by helping them automating the prospect research part. So, when you look at SDR teams, they usually spend time on Crunchbase, company websites, LinkedIn to find sales triggers. We automate that process. That's the first part of the value proposition. And then when we find a sales trigger, we generate a highly personalized sales email for that specific buying persona, and we surface that to the SDR in their sales engagement tool. That could be Frauenlob, that can be Outreach, or that can be another tool. So basically, we automate the manual parts of the SDR process, help them to send a great sales email and get more response.
Fantastic. And look, what a great area to be working on. I know we'll get into the topic in a minute, but I do want to just touch on that because those that have listened to any of these podcasts before or any of my interviews and those sorts of things will know that I'm a big fan of not compromising velocity for the sake of personalization to tick a box. And I think too many organizations are moving in that direction because it's a done thing, it looks better, it looks cool, whatever, and it's at the cost of efficiency and performance. What was it as an exposure to that area that made you go and work in there? Was there an opportunity you saw? Was there a particular conversation? How did we end up with Mesg?
Yeah, that's that's an interesting question. And my approach to sales was always that sales must be value adding in every step. In my career, I always focused on creating value in my conversations with customers. That was always my focus. And in my career, I hired probably over 100 salespeople so far. And very often I came across this wrong perception around what selling is, right? Very often people think this is around being pushy or being, being extremely outgoing and talking lots about the product. And I feel it's the other way around. It's more around pulling, it's more around listening, it's more around understanding the problem. So that was my mental model for selling. And then, I wanted to help salespeople to basically deliver their potential to their customers. And the first touch point is the SDR. That's the first, contact point. And I feel there's so much potential in salespeople. There's so much they can give to customers that I want to reduce the friction in that process. And that was the starting point. So I wanted to make it easier for salespeople to get in touch with customers and prospects to deliver the value that they can. And that's how we started. And then we started to talk to hundreds of SDRs and sales leaders to understand the problems. And quickly we understood that, it's not that easy to write good sales emails. Not everyone is a great writer. And then, the external environment also changed dramatically over the last 18 months. If you look at the latest HubSpot data, the number of sales emails doubled in the last 18 months, right? And response rates at the same time declined by 37%. So it's extremely tough to stand out there. It's extremely tough to get a response. And really the only way to get a response is to send relevant emails. And we want to help salespeople to do exactly that, send relevant emails.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. It's a very big problem. I see it every day. So I'm sure that message will play a really key role in moving that forward. Now, today we're going to talk about the challenges and the things that you have to navigate when you're selling in an early stage startup. So maybe we can go back to when that started in Message, and maybe you'll overlay some experience from previous roles as well, I'm sure. Let's look at the beginning of that journey. So you've got a product, you haven't yet sold it, or maybe you've sold it to a couple of close networks, you've had people testing it and all the rest of it. But we're now going to start and actually go and sell this thing. What are some of the things that went through your mind and some of the things that you maybe planned for at that stage? Because we're probably going back, 6, 12, 18 months for you. And I'm guessing there were some things in there that you had to do before you started pitching it that probably obvious now, but at the time you might not think about.
Yeah. First of all, I think you pointed out in our earlier conversation that I'm in quite a unique role because I'm a founder and the CEO. At the same time, I'm the CRO, and at the same time, I'm also the seller, the SDR, right? So I have the full spectrum. And I think looking backwards, one of my co-founders, he's our chief product officer, is super experienced in defining your personas and your ICP, your ideal customer profile. That is probably the most important step when you start thinking about your outbound sales plays. Who is actually your buying persona, who is your user, and really understanding them in all depth and detail. What are their pains? What problems are you solving for them? What's their background? What is their sales tech stack that they have already, right? So really getting a super crisp picture of your potential for your buyer is the starting point of that journey, and then how your product or future product will help to them to solve some of the problems they're having. So that's maybe the first and most important step in the journey. I think what we have learned and where we probably also I made some mistakes there is, when you then think you start to go out and you try to have discovery calls and you try to position this as sort of a design partnership with customers, right? And that is great at the very, very beginning. But after you have secured your first 2, 3, 4 clients, you really have to switch, because for your buyers, it's not really a value add to work with an early stage company. It's more, they're doing you a favor, but that's not really scalable, right? You can do that with a few companies, but it's not scalable. So relatively quickly, we moved away from having design partnerships into a low friction sales play. It's all about reducing the friction in every step of your sales process. Take friction out. And one of the ways to take friction out is just to start offering a free trial program, right? Show the value. And at the beginning, when you build a product, you probably don't have all those product-like mechanics in the product. You don't have the best onboarding experience, but still you onboard them manually, you show value, and then you can convert them. So, to sum it up, I think success in early stage selling is about reducing friction in every step as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think it's a really good point. I want to take you back to the first point you made, which is around ICP. So it sounds like you as a founding team have a reasonably good level of maturity around knowing what's coming from a sales perspective. You've been there and done it before. There are a number of founders who maybe haven't done that before, or they've done it in an employee capacity where they've maybe contributed to that discussion but haven't been responsible for it. What are some of the things that you give as advice around building out your ICP? Because I think sometimes it's easier than others, right? You get scenarios where it's very clear what you need to go after, and others where it could be quite broad and you're at risk of maybe saying, oh, we can sell to anybody, or we could, and keeping it fair, too broad and not targeted enough. Is there anything that you can take from that?
Yeah, I think you bring up the right topic, right? It's tempting to be very broad. But that's a big mistake, in my opinion. If you are too broad, you really miss the point, because you can't deliver for all your potential buying personas. I think at the end of the day, you have to have a very cold eye on your solution and the value you really create. And if you come my background is in sales. I had a big problem having customer discovery calls because I'm tempted to sell something and I was not listening careful enough. So I can only advise any founder to read the MUMS test. It's a great book, and it talks about how you run discovery calls, and it understanding that allows you to really ask the critical questions. Don't take yes for an answer, and understand that people want to be nice to you, so you have to dig deeper, right? To really uncover where you stand. That's the first point. So really have a cold eye on your own solution, and don't live in hopes. Be hyper realistic. And the second topic is the how do you say in England? The proof is in the eating, or in the pudding. In the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. People will tell you, hey, this is a great solution. Everybody tells you, hey, this is a fantastic solution. We'll definitely use it. But if you don't get a contract signed, if you don't get them to pay, even if it's £5 or £10, but you need to get some sort of early verification and validation. So don't believe the nice messages. It feels so nice to hear it, right?
Yeah.
But don't trust it. You need to see this point of validation. That's either a signed contract with agreed terms, access to data, or a small fee, or a time commitment, whatever it is. You need this commitment.
Do you know what? That's fantastic advice. I think that is something that a lot of people would suffer from an early stage, was suffering from falls gladly around the quality of what they're doing without validation, because we are humans, and often the people you reach out to for feedback are people that you already have a connection with. Much harder to be to be rude or negative towards somebody you like and that you've got a relationship with, and maybe they are feeding us what we want to hear rather than what we should be hearing. And I just think that's a fantastic piece of advice. You talked about taking the friction out, and I'm surmising here, but it felt like you were talking about small steps through the sales process rather than trying to do it quickly in one big step. So you touched on the notion of a free trial. Is there anything else that you did with customers? It sounds like you kind of had some elasticity around pricing, things like that, to get people using it and move things forwards. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very fair. I think it's you have to look at every touch point, every step in the sales process, and the free trial is just a big one.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about pricing, pricing is a whole topic in itself, right? I mean, how do you price something? And in order to come up with a really good pricing strategy, you have to understand the value that you create. Right. So there's this concept that's called a value stick. So if you think about a stick that's representing the whole value that you create for a customer, obviously you can't take more than the value you create. Usually you should have like a tenth of that as your pricing. But in order to get to that value stick, you have to have customers to understand how much value you create. So it's the pricing I would recommend at the beginning, just keep it simple. Again, for low friction, keep it simple, not too many variables in the pricing. And then later on, you can add some value-based pricing or the utility-based pricing or whatever model you want to go to. I think another aspect that's underestimated by many people, especially if you're selling to enterprises, is terms and conditions. Right, because on the customer side, it's in the enterprise play, it's not one person deciding. You have on average 6.8 people involved in a buying process, according to Gartner. So that means you have legal teams on the other side, you have IT security, you have RevOps, and if you have terms and conditions that are just copy pasted all over the place, are inconsistent and not well written, difficult to read, you make it much more difficult for the other side to say yes, right? Yes. And you also deliver an image that's not in line, or that's sort of not really a good one, and not an image you want to have, because as a startup you want to pretend that you are more than what you are at this stage. So investing in clear terms and conditions, making sure they're easy to understand, making them very clean is another step, I think, that many founders underestimate. And we had the same learning curve, right? I mean, that was one of the things we did. We changed our terms and conditions and had actually an expert writing them for us and spending some of our runway on it, which hurts, but we felt it was necessary.
I think it's a really interesting point, and one that I've not thought about before. Thought about out loud, I suppose, is the best way of putting it. So I think it's a valid point. You've touched on something there I think is really interesting, and I want to just test the notion of pushing boundaries around what reality is and what it looks like outside of your brand, outside of your four walls of our offices. And where is that line, be it when it stops being acceptable and unethical, and where is the line where you're not doing it enough? Because I think it's a really valid point. I often tell a story about when I started Air and I had 3 staff, and I was asked how many staff I had for the first time, and I think I said 7 or 8, which at the time looked really, really big. But I look back on now and it's very small. But at the time, it felt like I had to lie ultimately. And I'm not embarrassed about that, but it was a requirement to in that conversation, and it's not something you're proud of at the same time. It's a really fine line, isn't it? What commentary do you have on that?
It's extremely interesting that you had the same experience. I mean, for me personally, right? I mean, honesty is one of my personal beliefs and values. So, and it's sort of, I think the root of my success was that I set the expectations correctly. I never overpromised. Now, when you are a startup and you give full transparency about all your concerns and about your uncertainties, you will never win customers. They don't want to hear. They don't want to hear about that. No. And so you have this spectrum of, on the one end extreme, you say you have 100% transparency, you share everything. On the other end of the spectrum, you paint a picture of your vision, how it will be probably in 3 years. I think what you need is you look forward half a year to a year, because you will onboard a customer, you get them on a free trial. So that will take you, including the sales process in enterprise, 2 to 3 months, right? And then you are looking forward maybe 2 to 3 quarters more. And I think in the sales process, it's very important that you also not sell only what you have today, but also the product that you're building in the midterm. As I say, 1 year out. And that's not only because you want to pretend that you are more than you are. It's also because extremely important for the customer to understand the direction you are going. Right? Because if they invest in you, especially in the enterprise context, they need to get buy-in from all those other players. Now, if you are then switching your direction and going completely off in another direction, they also have sort of high opportunity cost because they started to working with you. So I think it's actually beneficial to both sides to have this conversation. But I feel the pain and I'm struggling with it in every conversation. But I feel that I found this sort of time frame of 6 to 12 months looking forward to be a very fair one and something I can live with personally.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think successful people do genuinely and generally pride themselves on a level of honesty, and you find that those things are often tied together. And it's a really tricky juxtaposition because you're in a scenario where if you, like you say, if you don't bend the truth somewhat, you will never get off the ground. And it's almost an unwritten acceptable behavior in those scenarios that it's okay. It's a bit like a buyer. It's kind of accepted that a buyer can lie to a seller, but that a seller can't lie to a buyer in a strange way. And I think that's it's a valid point. I suppose our joint advice there to the audience would be, look, you know, don't be silly with it, but you have to do what you have to do to get those first 5-10 clients over the line, but making sure that you can deliver and making sure they're the right kind of clients that you can deliver to, so that it doesn't come out in the wash at the other end that it was perhaps not the whole truth. A very interesting challenge, I think.
It is, and I think, you know, it's just, you know, the truth is the truth, and I don't think you should misrepresent the truth or lie. I don't think that's necessary. It's exactly what you said. It's about setting the expectation correctly, and then delivering on the on those expectations. But I also think you have to think big as a startup. If you don't think big, you won't excite people. And that can be in the future as well. You know, it's about the vision, the direction you're going. That's how you convince people, and then you have to deliver on it and be a trustworthy partner.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested to explore something. The fact that you're a founder and you've chosen to get in and be the front and center person for the actual sales process first is an interesting one, but also an important one. And I often speak to particularly product-led founders who maybe aren't as enthusiastic or as experienced in doing that, and who have a much harder time. How important has it been that you've got in, rolled your sleeves up? What have you maybe learned that you maybe otherwise wouldn't have if you'd have been at arm's length trying to do it? And what would you say to other founders who are maybe a bit nervous about getting out there and doing the selling themselves in the early stages?
Yeah. I you know, when I was with Antler, the startup generator, I made a presentation around B2B selling to all the other founders in the room. There's like, you know, 80 people or so, and I could sense that 95% of the guys there and girls, they didn't like sales, right? I mean, everybody seems to think it's terrible. You have to be pushy. You have to, you know, you have to talk people over, and I think that's actually not necessary. First, to be realistic again, as a founder, you have to tackle sales yourself. You have to learn how to sell your product. There's no way around it. You cannot outsource that. You cannot in the early days, right? I mean, in the early days, you have to be the one who understands how does your product resonate with the pains of your buyer. You can't delegate that to somebody else. It's you that has to understand that process. That I think that's the first point. And then the second point is around just having the right perception about selling. Selling is helping a customer to solve his problem or her problem, right? It's around understanding pain points. It's around listening and then positioning your offer correctly. And another thing that most people, I think, get wrong is many people believe that there are secret formulas to selling. And it's quite true that selling became more data driven in the last years and more automated. But there's a big element of just doing it and just getting started and be there when, you know, customers are ready to talk. And you know, sales is one of the few professions where you don't have formal education. Right, so you will find your way, and as a founder, you are best positioned to sell your product. Nobody knows your product better than you do, and ideally, you also understand your customer's pain point, and so you are more like an advisor, right? Think of yourself as an advisor, understanding your customer problems and trying to help them to solve it, and don't think about trying to sell a solution.
Interesting, very good advice. What is the right time to bring somebody in alongside you as a founder then? So you're in first, and I think our advice would be the same there. It's about, you have to do it. I get it's easier for sales-led founders, but if you're a product-led founder and you don't do it, you're setting yourself up to fail inevitably. But there must be a point at which you would say that's the point where you should start thinking about bringing people in around you to contribute to the sales process. Where would you see that being?
Yeah, I personally believe that, you know, first you have to find a product market fit, right? I mean, it's similar to the marketing discussion. When should you spend money on running campaigns. And I don't think you should try to spend money on your funnel, on bringing more people in if you can't hold them, if you can't keep them on the product, right? So if your churn rate is so high that all this money is stranded, then it doesn't make sense. So I think it's this phase when you suddenly see people that, you know, your stickiness becomes good, maybe your net revenue retention gets to, you know, 90-ish, maybe 100%, right? That's that point where I think you can really start scaling. So I would call it early signs of product market fit. I think then is where I would bring it in. That's the one element. The other element is maybe relating to fundraising. So we are VC backed. If you go down that route, right, where you take VC money in, then it has also to do with your fundraising plan. Because usually you would take the pre-seed money in to build the product, and then also the seed round is maybe still in that phase where you will experiment. You will maybe bring in a marketing person and maybe one sales person, but then at the end of the seed phase, you really want to start scaling it. So there's an element of the fundraising process as well. But I think early signs of product market fit is maybe a good
way of finding it. Yeah, and you touched on my next question, which is going to be around the marketing piece, and maybe less around marketing, more around what can you do that maybe doesn't cost money and wouldn't fall into the category of running campaigns, but as a founder that can maybe start to generate you some conversations that are outside of your immediate network that you would normally pick up the phone to and just have a conversation with. Have you seen any strategies work for you that get you some good conversations without it being overly taxing?
Yeah, I think that's a super question, because most founders get this problem that they use their personal networks, but this, you know, it dries out, it runs out after some time. You don't have any more warm introductions and so on, and then the question is what's next? What we did, for example, is we decided on purpose that we will bring on in the pre-seed round a lot of strategic angels. So we gave out small ticket sizes and didn't want to limit the number of angels, but rather have a large group of strategic angels, which in our case now enables us to have a large group that all have connections in the industry to help us find new early customers or help us with advice. So I think that is one element to it. The second element is around finding the right VC firm as well, right? If you find a strong VC that can help you with those introductions, even in the pre-seed phase, that is extremely valuable. Some of our my fellow Antler companies are quite successful also in offering their service as a perk to other VCs, right? So if you are part of a VC, if you are in the VC portfolio, if you're a company there, usually they have like, perks that they offer, reduced prices for certain elements. If you can place your product there as well, that's a nice, channel for you. And then I think from a marketing perspective, I think our strategy, I'm not sure if it's, if it's the best one, but we came to the conclusion, we don't want to spend any dollar on marketing until we are sticky enough. So our strategy is around content marketing, working with people in the industry like yourself. I mean, this podcast hopefully helps us, to get some people excited about what we are doing. And it's a very low cost way of doing marketing, and it helps you also create some authority in the industry. And of course, it's a nice side effect to learn. Every time you write a blog, you learn something, right? And in every conversation, I learned something. And I think content marketing is a quite nice way of getting started.
Yeah, great advice. And I think the other thing I hear quite often is around events, attending events, industry events, getting out, because again, it's something that you can do for free, but get several conversations in one hit that are two-way, that give you feedback, and that can maybe be a bit more about forming relationships with people rather than selling. But it often opens doors without you needing to put a huge amount of energy and effort into it as well. So again, something that probably comes far more comfortable to the sales founder like you or I, and far less comfortable to maybe a product-led founder, but two things that can really focus in on your brand and marketing efforts without having to spend a huge amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. And the events are coming back now, which is good. I mean, it was just difficult right now, the last 18 months, but now they're coming back. Interesting that you say this, with product-led growth and sales and marketing, those three, it's quite an interesting triangle, right? Because product-led is sort of really growing, and it's also growing into enterprise. So those elements of self-service in products is becoming stronger. And that's also an interesting discussion around how that will, change the way people sell, and also change the understanding of a sales leader of the business. Because in a fundraising, people love product-led growth models. Obviously, it's low cost. You can scale it up relatively quickly, and it's going now into the enterprise segment. But in my experience, you will always support product-led growth with sales teams to accelerate the adoption in an organization. I mean, let's say you sell your product to IBM. I work for IBM, right? So you find a little segment in IBM that start using your product. That's great, but how can you then jump from that one department to other departments? How can you bring it up the ladder? And there it's where product-led has its limitations. And many companies have shown that they use product-led and support it with sales, just accelerate the adoption. And I think that's a good model.
Oh, that's a fantastic point. I want to ask you about the way it feels as a founder to be involved in those early sales conversations and be out there doing the hunting and chasing down those first bits of revenue and having those fantastic business conversations. I think it's very easy to sit here as a sales-led founder and say you should do this, but maybe people aren't as confident or experienced in selling or in sales as a process. And maybe we can give them a word of encouragement around actually the way it feels, because in my experience, it's really enjoyable to get out and get those conversations with people around your product and to hear the feedback, and also to maybe get some of those wins yourself, and the feeling of pride of winning my first sale versus now somebody in the team winning a sale is completely different. It's almost a part of the journey that you don't want to rob yourself off as well. It's highly rewarding, I'd say. Would you agree?
Yeah, and that's why I love sales. It's, in my opinion, the best profession. Is so direct feedback. You win or you don't, right? And it on the spot, and you can learn from it. And again, I think you said many things I fully agree with. It's around the mindset as well, right? I mean, think about, you're building something and you're building that for a reason, right? You want to solve something. So you're helping some people to solve a pain. That should be your mindset. And then you're just trying to find more people where you can help them have, a better business themselves. So it's really this mindset of helping and going out. And one of my fellow co-founders at Antler, he's also, he's introvert. He doesn't like selling, and he asked me, how can I get started? What should I do? And I don't enjoy those conversations so much. I think at some point, you might also just have to accept that this is the way it is, and you get started. And if you don't like cold water, you might never really enjoy it, but you get used to it. And then after 10 conversations, 15 conversations, it gets easier and easier and easier. And one thing I would always do is keep some form of where you collect the feedback that you get from those sales conversations. In every sales conversation, you will hear something. Either you will hear an objection, you will hear a feature request, you will hear what they like, what they don't like. After every sales call, make sure you note down, like the 1 or 2 takeaways from that, and record it on a spreadsheet or on your CRM or wherever. It's super important for not only for you to learn how you can improve your selling, but also as feedback to the rest of the organization, to the product teams, to the marketing teams, to the developers as well. It's super powerful. We are doing that since we've been founded, and reading all those comments over the months is extremely encouraging.
Yeah, really good point. Final thing for me, I want to try and understand what you've put energy and effort into other than going out and trying to have conversations with people, because you will have to have some kind of toolkit behind you. You've mentioned a CRM there. I know that you've got some good slide decks out there that I've seen around the product. So it's very tempting to go in a straight line and just go and sell it. But there are certain things, some basics, you touched earlier on having the ICP right, for example, that kind of needs to be done and should have just as much energy and effort focused in on than just going out and talking to people. What are some of those things that you've felt that you needed to have there ready to go before you were out having conversations at velocity?
Yeah. So maybe as a starting point, in my opinion, it's always good to talk with potential customers. Always, even if you're not prepared. Always.
Yeah.
So never use the reason that you're not prepared as an excuse not to talk to a customer. It's always good to talk to a customer or a potential customer. But of course, you should be prepared and you should learn and you should improve. And the ICP and understanding the buyer persona is key. The second topic I find is extremely important is the messaging. So how do you position the value proposition that you have? How do you communicate the pain points you're addressing, right? So find a way of standardizing how you communicate that, because that you will use that in your sales pitches, you will use that in your outbound cadences, in your CRM system. You will use that in the elevator pitches, right? You use it all the time. So try to come up with a really well thought through messaging. And then I think the third thing is try to automate as much as you can, right? Because you are a small team, as a founding team. Use the tools. I mean, nowadays you can start on a free trial with HubSpot. They give certain startups up to 90% discount, at least for 1-2 years. And many other players in that industry have the same, and use automation. Examples are, if you get an inbound lead, have an inbound lead sequence that not only you send an email saying, hey, can we have a call, but that you have like 5 touch points in case they don't respond. Have an outbound sequence that you use. Have those sequences by different buying personas, and then monitor the performance of those sequences and improve them over time. It's not that difficult if you understand the buying persona to create a good messaging for that persona, but you have to invest in understanding the buyer persona first and then write it from there. But automate as much as you can at the beginning and spend money on the tool set. If I tell you what our tool set is, you would be shocked. I think we have almost every tool you can buy, but being remote and being a small team, having Slack, having Jira, having Confluence, having HubSpot, having all those tools available is extremely valuable.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and actually you're touching on a whole other topic there, which is around your investment. What we're saying is go and have the conversations. Marketing spend, you don't want to be investing in that yet. Sales spend and headcount spend, but actually product and tools, automation, things to make things work more effectively. Overinvest early, because that's a really good opportunity, and maybe that gives some people some guidance around where to focus their attention. I just want to, this is final question from me around sort of the biggest challenges so far from you. We've maybe touched on them all, I don't know, but whether there's anything you can look back over the last sort of 12 months on, or whatever that period is, and say these have been the biggest challenges in a startup sales environment when nobody knows who you are and you're trying to build, you're trying to build out the conversations with the market, you're trying to learn. What have been, just surmise those biggest challenges across that journey?
So one of the biggest challenges was, when do you know that it's time to change direction? So so you have your idea, you have a proposition, you validated it, you're trying to sell it. It feels okay, but it's not super easy. Right, it feels like you're Sisyphus. You're pushing up the mountain, right? And then you go to the next one, and the stone is rolling down again. And it's so difficult because they invested already time and money into this proposition. So when do you know when it's time to shift? And we shifted. So we changed direction. At the beginning, we were a writing assistant, helping people to write better, like Grammarly for sales. That's where we started. And now we moved into this automation part. And it's, I'm not sure I have the right answer. I think you just will feel that it's very difficult to position and get customers to sign even a free trial agreement or something if the proposition is not resonating. And then if you find something that works, suddenly everything becomes much easier. Unfortunately, that's a very good advice, but that's really a very tough decision to make. And there I would, you probably can try out, testing different value propositions in parallel, so you're not 100% committed. But that was the most difficult part in my journey so far.
That's fantastic. Look, really good experience for us to be able to pick from. I'll leave an open final thing. Anything we've not touched on that you think is valuable to people in that early stage as you've been through the last 12 months?
No, what I would suggest is if there are founders out there and they have, what you pointed out, they have this sort of concerns about selling. I mean, please find me on LinkedIn, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to jump on a one-on-one and share what we did in sales. And if you're interested in automating part of your outbound, then go on Mesg.ai and have a look at what we do. And Owen, thank you so much for inviting me again. It was a great conversation, and thank you.
Pleasure. I absolutely love the way that you jumped to what I was going to give you the chance to do next, which is how do people get in touch with you? And you've gone and done it and made the most of being on here, as you should, too right, given the stage that you're at. Emanuel, thank you. I've loved chatting to you. You've brought some great insights and clearly a very experienced sales professional. I hope our audience has enjoyed listening to you today. We'll hope to speak to you again very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Owen. Bye.
Bye.